Welcome to a video of an honest and detailed review of what happened to New World. This is, to be fully transparent, an audiovisual festival of disappointment, a denunciation, a reckoning, and a farewell. Today, we're talking about New World, specifically the latest transformation in a long series of identity crises. New World, Aeternum. A clarification before we start. Before diving in, here's an important note. New World, as part of its reinvention, and especially with the console release, has gained a significant influx of new players. These newcomers are experiencing everything for the first time and are having a fantastic time with the MMO. Lucky them. This video, however, represents the perspective of a long-term PC player, offering a very different view than what new players might have. My intent is not to ruin anyone's enjoyment or spoil their fun. That holds true for all my videos, including this one. Criticism, at least in part, is always subjective. If you're having fun with a game, you don't need validation or confirmation from reviewers, streamers, or YouTubers. Sometimes, we enjoy games that might have their fair share of justifiable criticism, but those issues can be entirely irrelevant to us due to personal preferences. So, enjoy your time in Aternum while it lasts. The early stages are phenomenal, but perhaps keep some of the points raised in this video in the back of your mind as food for thought. A brief recap of the past year. Let's start with a short summary of the past few months. Honestly, this could be a separate video, so here are just the most critical highlights of the past year in New World's development, following the release of the content light and ultimately unsuccessful expansion, Rise of the Angry Earth. No significant new content, no roadmap. Disastrous communication. The predictable outcome of this cocktail of content catastrophes? A historic collapse in player numbers, with concurrent players dropping to just about 4,000 at its lowest point. Mind you, these are the total numbers, a figure that for an MMO with New World's ambitions and production costs is dangerously close to existential risk. As you can imagine, sticking with the MMO over the past year hasn't exactly been an enjoyable ride. Still, there was a glimmer of hope on the horizon, a lifeline amid the storm of disappointments that PC players were teased with in every developer video. The big mysterious announcement in the summer. And then it came, during the Summer Game Fest. We New World players learned that we would soon no longer be playing an MMORPG, but rather a solo and co-op action RPG under the new name New World, Aternum. This announcement was not only far removed from reality and steeped in marketing hype, but also felt like a raised middle finger to the game's existing player base after all the waiting and false promises. After a series of recent blunders, it seems the developers have once again managed to alienate their own community. This time, not only did they fail to strike the right tone, but in their announcements and statements, they outright ignored the existing player base, dedicating their messaging exclusively to the new console players. This came after a year of silence and empty reassurances. On top of that, they announced the aforementioned console release alongside a handful of new content that seemed as thin as butter, spread over too much bread, to borrow a wise hobbit's words. We'll touch on that content later, but that, in summary, was the state of things leading up to New World, eternal, player numbers in freefall, and a massive debt of goodwill owed to the PC community after a year of total stagnation. With this backdrop, I spawned into the newest iteration of the MMO, New World, Aeternum starts off with the goal of impressing and hooking new players from the first minute. The opening of the game has been significantly polished, presenting a series of scenes that not only delight the eyes, but also bear little resemblance to the actual gameplay experience. After this picturesque opening, once I arrived on the beach, I noticed some upgraded ground textures and a broader color palette. However, by the time I reached the first town, the island looked pretty much the same as it always had. What is genuinely new are the archetypes available during character creation. These are designed to give new players the impression that New World has classes. Clearly, Amazon Game Studios had the idea that players expect some form of class system in an action RPG, so they added these archetypes to fulfill that expectation and convey a sense of familiar mechanics. The problem? New World is fundamentally not designed around classes. These archetypes often lead to confusion and false expectations. The old approach, scattering every weapon type at the spawn point and letting players experiment, was much better suited to the nature of the game. Despite this, I leveled alongside many new and returning players and quickly remembered why I kept coming back to New World despite all its issues. The truth about the MMO is that it still offers exceptional qualities in certain areas. Wandering through New World's world, soaking in the atmosphere, gathering resources, and experiencing the sound design, all of it remains incredibly fun, creating an engaging and immersive experience. The past years have also been used to significantly improve the game in many respects. Enemy variety has increased. The campaign and quest structure have seen dramatic improvements. Cutscenes have been added, and much more has been optimized. Compared to its 2021 launch, the MMO is almost unrecognizable in terms of its campaign and leveling phase. That said, the difficulty on the way to max level is laughably easy, though this is true for most competing MMOs as well. As enjoyable as the revamped leveling experience is, its brevity is disappointing. For me, it took just a day and a half to reach the new max level of 65. To be fair, I skipped cutscenes and stories since I was already familiar with them, and I leveled efficiently thanks to my experience with the game. A new player, exploring everything for the first time, will undoubtedly take much longer. Still, it's always a shame when a leveling phase can be completed in a day, if you have even a moderate understanding of what you're doing. Console-friendly UI. One more thing that stands out in the new version of the game is the revamped interface, which is clearly designed with the console version in mind. Opinions on the UI will vary depending on personal taste, but its design is certainly a notable departure. However, the implementation of the new mana bar and debuff display hasn't exactly been met with universal acclaim among players. Additionally, a number of essential quality-of-life features are still conspicuously absent, and their absence is deeply felt. Features like a guild chest or the ability to save skill trees, so I don't have to respec my bow every time I switch between OPR and a dungeon, are simple requests that remain unfulfilled. This neglect has become something of a tradition in New World, only rivaled by the recurring appearance of bugs, crashes, and technical issues. For instance, it's rather inconvenient when a fire spirit crucial to progress gets stuck under a staircase. Although, kudos to my teammate, whose fiery self-sacrifice saved the day in that situation. On the bright side, let's hope Amazon's upcoming Lord of the Rings MMO doesn't suffer from the same art sort engine woes. Let's move on to endgame content. and activities, which include familiar options and 3 new additions. Starting with the established content, wars, which were meant to be the MMO's central focus, are still a lot of fun. I particularly enjoy early wars, where progress isn't yet locked in. However, there has been virtually no progress in this area since the game's launch. The lack of practice wars, something the PvP community has been requesting for years, is astounding, especially considering how helpful such a feature would be in addressing issues like the lack of rotation among war participants. And that's without even mentioning the need for an expansion of the game's limited PvP modes. Dungeons remain well designed and are an essential part of the MMO's shift from war-centric PvP gameplay to a more theme park-like, solo-friendly experience. Over time, new expeditions have been introduced, and the mutation system has been streamlined from 10 tiers to 3, making the player pool more cohesive. Cross-server automated matchmaking and daily reward chests have also been added, signaling Amazon's investment in this area. However, despite the clear effort and quality of these additions, dungeons do not play a central role in progressing toward the new maximum gear score of 725. Instead, progress toward the new gear cap is almost exclusively tied to the new raid and PvP zone, topics we'll discuss shortly. This means that even the highest tier dungeons contribute minimally to gearing up, aside from providing crafting materials like dark matter and a chance at 700 gear drops. This shift is particularly problematic because dungeons are the central, most attractive activity for many PvE players. Reducing their relevance in progression has understandably negative consequences. Of course, Outpost Rush is still around, although it's still confined to the same map it's had for 3 years. The silver lining: you can now ride mounts in Outpost Rush, which at least makes matches end a bit faster. But naturally, a colorful bouquet of both new and old PvP exploits persists. Let's now turn to the 3 new major endgame pillars introduced in New World Aeternum. The new raid is incredibly difficult, visually appealing, and set in a desert-themed environment. However, it doesn't quite reach the visual splendor and brilliance of dungeons like Tempest Heart. The raid consists of 3 bosses interspersed with puzzles and trash mobs. Overall, it's a solid addition to the game. It's also, as mentioned, a key source of the game's best gear. To tackle the raid, it's advisable to assemble a well-equipped, dedicated group that comes prepared with appropriate protection perks and consumables. The new PvP zone, set in Cutlass Keys and inhabited by pirates, is a mixed success. The concept is that everyone fights for themselves, with no option to form groups. However, anyone who's played a multiplayer game can quickly see the flaw. Players inevitably team up informally and roam the PvP island together. This was a significant issue at launch. That said, my recent trips to the pirate zone were mostly one-on-one encounters, suggesting the concept might now work better. Or I may have just been lucky. The idea is simple: roam the island, kill enemies, both mobs and players, loot chests, and earn special doubloons. These doubloons can be lost if a sneaky opponent kills and loots you, but if you leave the PvP area alive, the coins are yours to keep. At a fountain, you can exchange the doubloons for various items, such as random loot crates with gear up to the new max score of 725. However, these crates regularly feature less than ideal perks. You'll also need a golden coconut, obtainable once per week, to claim the top rewards. Additionally, 710 gear can be bought for a few doubloons and upgraded further. The soul trials were a fantastic idea in principle, solo boss battles with impressive design and clear effort put into their creation. Before Aeternum, I had only seen this type of content once, during the main campaign. Repurposing these beautifully designed instances as repeatable endgame content seems logical, especially given the endgame's hunger for more activities. The trials are now accessible via the activity menu. Unfortunately, their implementation may be one of the most poorly executed additions in New World history. The trials are neither particularly fun, they're quite easy, nor remotely rewarding. After earning the associated artifact, in my case, by the second run, there's no reason to play them again. This raises the obvious question: how did this system, comprising 1/3 of Aternum's new content, get released in such a lackluster state? Someone surely should have noticed how poorly designed it is. It's reminiscent of the infamous sandworm loot table debacle, which was ignored for months, turning that content into archival material. While the sandworm rewards have since been adjusted, they still require further enhancement via New World's convoluted, confusing, and inconsistent upgrade system. These 3 new endgame pillars, the Raid, the Pirate PvP Zone, and the Soul Trials, are what PC players waited an entire year for. Comparing this output to what competitor MMOs have released in the same time frame, it's hard not to feel underwhelmed. For the dedicated New World enthusiast, these additions certainly don't inspire excitement or delight. However, the content introduced with Aternum isn't even my biggest problem with the action RPG, nor are the old issues or missed opportunities. My primary issue with New World, Aternum, is the target lock feature. The introduction of this feature, designed for console players and their control limitations, has fundamentally altered the gameplay on PC, especially in PvP. The ability to lock onto a target and automatically land hits, whether in melee or ranged combat with minimal effort, strips the game of its greatest strength, its unique combat mechanics. Previously, New World's action combat felt genuinely distinct, requiring precision, movement, and positioning. It wasn't just about dodging and blocking like in games such as ESO, but demanded accuracy. Striking an enemy's head, chest, or legs had meaningful consequences, like triggering critical hits or slowing opponents. Now, with target lock, those core gameplay principles lose significance. Skills like the Firestaff's dash or the Rapier's flash have become automated steering mechanisms, making combat feel overly simplified and clunky. While some weapons are less affected by this feature, I primarily play as a Firestaff user, and the change has been profoundly detrimental. For example, the Firestaff's Pillar of Fire, which spawns a column of flames under the target, works perfectly with target lock. Unlike projectiles such as arrows or musket shots, which require timing and aiming to account for travel time, the Pillar of Fire hits instantly. This means that even mounted enemies in Outpost Rush can be easily knocked off their mounts as long as they're in range. It removes the need to aim altogether. Even abilities like Fireball, which has travel time, are trivialized. With target lock, I only need to wait for the right moment, like when an enemy slows down or briefly stops, and the attack will almost always land. The skill gap has shifted from aiming and positioning to simply toggling target lock on and off at the right times. While this can optimize performance, it's not engaging or enjoyable. Ignoring the feature isn't an option either, as it would put players at a severe disadvantage. The issue isn't limited to PvP. In PvE, the target lock further reduces the enjoyment of gameplay. In chaotic dungeons filled with particle effects, fire patches, and skill animations, I can spam attacks with target lock and hit enemies without even knowing what I'm targeting. A prime example is the final boss of Empyrean Forge. This boss, with its fireballs and flame zones, is hard to track visually in the small arena. However, with target lock, I can hit it effortlessly, turning a challenging fight into a mindless grind. Ultimately, the target lock removes the best aspect of New World's combat, turning it into a dull tab targeting system with 6 skills. Even weapons like the blunderbuss have suffered due to how their abilities interact with target lock. Amazon's response to balance concerns, reducing weapon damage, feels like a misguided and ineffective solution. To end on a less bitter note, let's discuss the recently released roadmap. One of the most exciting announcements is seasonal worlds, temporary servers that last about 3 months and introduce unique rule sets that shake up gameplay. The first seasonal world will have a PvP theme, which is intriguing but surprising, given Aternum's recent influx of new players, many of whom might not enjoy such a hardcore experience. Personally, I find the idea highly appealing. In this world, PvP will always be active, crafting will play a huge role, and players can lose special equipment and materials upon death. It's a bold concept that channels an Albion Online vibe. The seasonal world will also offer exclusive rewards and progression opportunities, making it worthwhile for competitive players. However, it might alienate some of the broader player base. Future seasonal worlds may focus on PvE, catering to a different audience. Several of my criticisms have been addressed in the roadmap. A preview of a new Outpost Rush map. Improvements to the mutation system, which is currently irrelevant for endgame progression. Daily solo trials, though hopefully with better rewards than the current iterations. In development are also pickup wars, long-requested training wars. Unfortunately, these seem limited to existing companies, missing the opportunity to introduce newer players to wars via matchmaking. Additionally, the roadmap hints at updates to Invasion Mode, a cool but underutilized PvE activity, and the long-awaited global storage quality of life feature. Finally, the exploration section teases ambitious concepts like a territory system overhaul, influence towers, and company halls. These ideas sound great, but without timelines, it's uncertain if or when they'll arrive. The roadmap has rekindled some interest for me, enough to turn my planned farewell to New World into just a break. Concepts like seasonal worlds and quality of life improvements are worth checking out. However, the ongoing issues with target lock and other deficiencies leave me cautious and reserved in my overall assessment. It's worth noting that New World has introduced a free trial period, but unfortunately, it's only available to console players, leaving PC players out. This decision feels like another missed opportunity to grow the community.